Hey, y'all. So we are going to try this again. I hope this works this time around. We're going to be talking about the Great Depression, the causes and effects. This will cover pretty much the whole power map from the other night. We're going to, starting with the Great Depression, and we're going to talk a little bit about the state. So make sure you have your power map out and that's where we're ready to roll. So we're going to talk about the Great Depression, causes and effects. I'm going to add some stuff that Dr. Vogel didn't have for your SOL. So you know how to pass that thing. And let's get started. All right. This is part that Dr. Vogel does not have. The long-term causes of the Great Depression. I think this is a wonderful image behind it. What you have is a 1929 image of all these Ford automobiles. They produced them. And what are they going to do with them? They're not sure, because why? The Second Industrial Revolution had expanded the production capacities, especially the United States. The United States became the great producer of consumer goods. And don't forget, this was a supply-driven economy. The merchants, the entrepreneurs, they would create products for people to consume. That's a really important aspect, the consumption. Remember, the idea of consumption is you get it, you consume it, and you need something new. That's going to be important. But by the 1920s, the markets were oversaturated, caused by overproduction. They have this unnatural employment system. They're employing hundreds of thousands of men into these factories, producing hundreds and thousands of products for the domestic and foreign markets to buy. But by the time we get to the 1920s, think about it. If you have a car, do you need a second car? Think about it. Do you really need to do a second car? Do you need to do a third car? Do you need a fourth car? So once you have consumed something like a car, a washing machine, a stove, your demand for those new ones kind of slows down. That's going to create a bubble. And we're going to talk about that bubble in a second. We do need to make sure you understand the First World War and Versailles had an impact. By the end of the First World War, the United States and Japan had superseded the European states. Think about the ding in British prestige. Remember, the Anglo-German rivalry over industrialization creates the atmosphere for the First World War. Well, now, after the First World War, with Great Britain depending so much on the Americans and Japanese, they're going to be over-surpassed. It's going to be very difficult for them to reconstruct their factories to compete equally with the United States and Japan. I do want to talk about this concept of a post-war boom. The post-war boom is where, hey, we're home, we're tired of talking about war, we're tired of sacrificing the home front, we're going to spin. From 1919 to 1923, the roaring 20s, there's a sense of excitement, the jazz age, consumerism was all the rage. People were excited, causing even more production, employing these veterans. The German reparations became the basis for this. I know the big lie that Germany was overwhelmed by the $55 billion of reparations. Yeah, probably not the best thing because they weren't part of the negotiations. But the reality was, look what the Dawes Plan and the Young Plan from 1924 to 1930 did. What do we see here? U.S. loans more money to Germany than they have to pay. And then the Allies pay. So this is an interdependence. U.S. to Allies to back to the U.S. Germany, Allies, U.S. Germany, Allies, U.S. And really, there's a codependency. And as long as the German reparations are being paid for, and really inspired by American investments in Germany, which is true, and we know that going into, and Dr. Vogel does a great job here as well, by the time we get to 1928-29, those U.S. investments in which they're used to be loaning all this money, they begin to withdraw because the entrepreneurs are really excited about the stock market as the stock market continues to rise. We'll see that a little bit later, but the whole point of this slide is to see about how Europe is falling behind. The post-war boom creates more production, and everything is based now on those German reparations. We already know the Germans don't want to pay. Now, during the 1920s, there were key indicators that demonstrated the Great Depression on the horizon. I think sometimes we get caught up and we're teaching this to students, to eighth graders. We just kind of, the stock market crash, total surprising. That's not true. It may have been surprising to maybe the average investor, but the wealthiest, by the time they get to 1929, because of these indicators, they've actually liquidated. They've sold out. Divested their investments, turn it into gold because they knew bad things were about to happen. The wealthy going to get rich, the poor are going to get poor during this time period. But let's see the indicators. The big thing was the agricultural crisis in the 1920s. You may have heard about the Dust Bowl in 1930. Horrible thing, but it actually is caused by the agricultural crisis of the 1920s. The United States farms had been feeding Europe from 1917 into 1922 as they begin to recover. The farmers begin to over-farm their land. As they farm more and more land, they take more loans from the banks because there's a never-ending demand. But by 1922, that demand did end. The French and Belgian farmers had recovered. They're beginning to feed their own people. What happens to the United States demand? It collapsed. Now the farmers have a ton of land they have to care for. They go to the banks. The banks can't loan them any more money. The farmers go broke. The banks go broke. By 1925, 26, there is a clear indicator that things are not going well. The use of protection tariffs. Governments realized there was a decrease in demand. With a decrease of demand, they wanted their domestic markets to buy domestic goods, so they began to use protective tariffs. This actually is a cause of this thing called World War II, especially with Japan. Japan was very angry as the European states and American states used protective tariffs. It halted international trade. Halting international trade actually disrupts the entire economic system. And think back to the Dawes Plan, that interdependency. Now, in 1926, the British had this thing called the General Strike. You read about it. I hope you go back to your notes. Some of y'all on your power maps need to go back and fix this a little bit. The General Strike in 1926 was a clear indication the economics in England was not going well. As British Parliament attempted to create a law to kind of allow for the reduction of pay of the miners, the Labour Party successfully organized a massive general strike. All of the workers seemingly refused to work, and they demanded that they don't get punished for this for the economic downturn. The general strike was a horrible moment for the British as it really challenged their economy. Now, the new conservative government was able to overcome this, make some adjustments. But once again, just because you're able to overcome it, it still is an indicator. There is bad things heading. And the expansion of credit. By 1925, that post-war boom is clearly over with. People begin to think about rekindling their savings account. But if you start saving, you stop spending. If you stop spending in a supply-driven economy, bad things are coming. So what do? They introduce consumer credit. Consumer credit. Hey, you have a car that's outdated. Yes, it's only 4 years old. Yes, it's going to run for another 20 years, but you need a new car. Oh, I don't have money for a new car. Oh, what we'll do, you come in, select what you need, discuss with me how we can pay it, and you will immediately have it. I don't need a new oven. I have one. Wait a minute. We have cooler ovens, newer ovens. You need ovens. Select what you need, arrange how you're going to pay it, and you get it today. So instead of saving, spend. Oh, by the way, that's your patriotic duty. Consumer credit extended the post-war boom unnaturally. What did Thomas Malthus say about unnatural things? I hope you remember Thomas Malthus. He's the one that's talked about population. If you unnaturally increase the prosperity, depression will occur. So we already see indicators. Probably the worst thing that occurred was buying stocks on margin. If you didn't learn that last year, buying stock on margin is investors would loan money to buy stocks. The whole point of buying stocks on margin is to expand the amount of capital you can loan so you can make more money. The problem is when you rely on loans, that means so let's say I give you 10 cents let's say it's $1 stock and I give you 10 cents. That 10 cents now, I buy it on margin. I take a loan for the rest of the 90 cents. The banks now have loaned me money, 90% of the money to do this. So now the stock that says it's worth $1, how much have I really put in? Only a dime. The hope was I'd keep my 90 cents, put it to the side, maybe turn it into gold. And then when the margin call came, when the bank needed my money, I could easily just hand it over. That's not quite how it happened because people believed that the stock market was going to consistently go up. What they did is instead of buying one $1 stock for $1, they bought 10 $1 stocks for $1. And they invested all of their money based on margin. And now I may have had $100, but now it tells me I'm worth $1,000. I'm excited. I'm living on credit. I'm living a fat boy's life. I am so bougie, totally excited. Unfortunately, the stock market began to realize in mid-1929 that it may not be as wealthy in capital as indicated. The stock market began to realize it lacked the capital because all the rest of the capital was based on loan. If you don't quite understand my description, definitely Google that real fast. It'll take you about 10 minutes. Now, the perfect storm, the immediate cause of the Great Depression. That's the last point on this slide. Gustav Stresemann, the great Weimar diplomat that held the whole system together. He oversaw the Young Plan. He was all excited. He was ready to continue on, and he dropped dead of a heart attack on October 3rd. A week later, Germany said, not without that guy telling them to pay it, we're not sure. We're going to delay our reparation. We can't quite pay that. France, OMG, if we don't get the money from Germany, we can't pay the U.S. back. So it declares it can't pay the debt back. That's when the stock market said, wait a minute, margin, no debt repayment. Whoop. That's where October 29, 1929, the stock market crashed. Really quickly, I just want to point out the stock market actually just corrected itself as the value collapsed. It was going to the actual value of the amount of hard currency that it had. We call it the stock market crash. It was a shocking moment. Thousands of investors lost everything that they had. And we even see in this Brooklyn newspaper, Wall Street in panic. That's more important than even trying to kill the Italian king. Totally interesting. Now, as the Great Depression happens, I want to point out the banks closed. You better make sure you have that in your power map. The banks. Once the banks begins to close down, it creates massive chaos. Banks are necessary to organize the economy. I hope we've done a good enough job all the way back with the Bank of Amsterdam. Banks are necessary. But because everybody was on consumer and credit and buying stocks on margin, the banks closed and there's massive unemployment. The massive unemployment shocked the middle and lower classes. They weren't sure. Now, the wealthy, they got wealthy off this time, even wealthier, but the middle class collapses. We're on the verge possibly of a Marxist revolution in the United States, in Great Britain, in Germany. There it becomes a reality in which now maybe we're going into a two-class system. I do want to point out the gender role crisis. As men were displaced, they were no longer the breadwinners. They couldn't get the jobs. It forced the women out to seek opportunities such as maids, other domestic servants, and they even sold apples. They are the ones, they become the heroes of the house as they are able to scrape together finances, while the men feel like they have zero opportunity. What do some of these men do? Some of the Great War veterans join fascist and communist gangs. They begin to realize that maybe the state that they fought for didn't care about them. They had no opportunities. And this adds to that new polarization. Remember, this is similar to the Ruhr Valley crisis that occurred in 1922 as Hitler left that Munich beer hall push. I will tell you, the Great Depression greatly positively impacted Adolf Hitler's hope to become leader. We'll see how that plays out later. Now, it also changed the way the state worked. The most important thing here, I just want to make sure this is the most important part of this slide. Great Britain and the United States, they shifted away from laissez-faire economics to something called Keynesian economics. Please write that down. Keynesian economics. In your power map, you should have something in Great Britain about John Maynard Keynes and his book. That's what Keynesian economics is. According to Keynes, the entire depression was caused by a demand issue. He saw as unemployment shot up and people weren't able to buy products, it created a catastrophe. So what did he want to do? He wanted to solve that. What's the only thing that can solve that? It's the state. We call it, really quickly, I don't have it in there, we call it deficit, DEFICIT, deficit spending. And deficit spending is when the government borrows money to create public works. If you did this last year before quarantine, what we had was the CCC. It's called, ever heard of the New Deal? New Deal, the CCC, the WPA, the government would borrow money to employ people. And once people were employed and they make money, they would be able to start demanding. If they start demanding, that means they start spending. And once they start spending, factories have to start production. Once companies began to produce goods, they're going to have to rehire people, ending the unemployment crisis. The economy recovers. And as the economy recovers, the way we pay for the deficit is through taxes. There's a new reliance on the government that comes out of that First World War and total war. People trust the government in Great Britain and the United States, and we're going to see that continue. Italy and Germany shifted to fascism. We'll see more about this. You read about Italy last night, and you'll read about Germany tonight. But it's all about the state-organized economy. People didn't trust the democracies, so they choose totalitarian regimes. This term totalitarian regimes is the new cool hip word for autocracies. The bourgeoisie owned the factors of production, but the totalitarian regimes told them what to produce. I do want to point out Eastern European democracies are collapsing. These are baby countries. Remember, they were just born. Poland, reborn since first time since the 1780s. Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia. Even Austria and Hungary were completely new in the sense because they don't have the Habsburgs. These countries are going to one after another collapse because they do not know how to react to the Great Depression. So the Great Depression created a new reliance of the citizens on the state. The state provides for them in each of these elements to a more drastic degree as we move further down, total dependence. And this is going to shoot us right to the final. I'm going to fly through this. I do want to point out Great Britain and the Great Depression. This goes right to your tail end of your power map right before the decolonization. What we see here is the Labour Party and Ramsay MacDonald. The Labour Party really emerges here. Ramsay MacDonald becomes a cult of personality. You should have noticed in the mid-1920s, he's elected the first Labour prime minister. Clearly, the Liberal Party has diminished. It's over the Irish question. It's over all these other issues. And what do we see? Ramsay MacDonald is now the new cool Labour leader. The Conservative Party is led by Stanley Baldwin. I do want to point out, I do hope you picked up that Stanley Baldwin, he did kind of a dangerous thing. At the height of the general strike, he accused Ramsay of MacDonald being communist. Did everybody see that? That's mass politics. It's the first time we really see mass politics unfold here. Stanley Baldwin does win the election by creating that fear of communism. But out of that fear, he realized, maybe I don't want to polarize. And the reason that's important is because in 1931 and 1936, instead of polarization, the Labour Party, Conservative Party, and the Liberal Party formed the national government. From 1931 to 1936, I love this. We see this hope here, vote for the national government. 1935, I got a job, helped see the difference between the guys. Great marketing. But I want to point out, in the worst parts of this Great Depression, the British politicians put aside mass politics for unity. Great Britain is clearly the pinnacle of a stable nation state, a stable democracy. And in fact, they're the only stable democracy in Europe. France and the Great Depression. And if you see my political cartoon, I think this is a wonderful one because what direction are we supposed to go? Left, right, center? What's Lady Liberty doing? Nothing. She has no idea which way to go. Complete confusion. This 1930s political cartoon demonstrates this and so great. And how do we know? I want to point out there's rapid polarization through the 1920s. We had the National Bloc versus the cartel left. National Bloc, they're as far right as you can possibly go. They're nearly Nazi-like. Poincaré was a really military-minded man. He is the one that oversaw the French coercion of Germany. That created chaos. And what do? The next election, we go from the far right to the far left. The cartel left, this is not the Popular Front of Leon Blum. These are a bunch of commies. They're elected. They're going from far right to far left. No direction. Chaos. What Mr. Wassinger talked about with the formation of the Third Republic is coming to roost. The Third French Republic is very unstable and very chaotic. From 1932 to 1933, I hope you notice, France has 6 different cabinets. In a parliamentary system, that means they have a series of elections within 18 months. There's total destruction of their political state. Remember, Great Britain, one government, the national government during this time period. France, chaos. Which direction? The last hope came from the Popular Front with Leon Blum. The French New Deal that you saw, he promised a 40-hour work week. He promised vacations. People were excited. In 1936 to 37, people were like, wait a minute, we might have stability for the first time. Unfortunately, there was a member of his Popular Front cabinet that was corrupt, and it was discredited, collapsed. By 1938, the Third Republic was on the verge of collapse and a revolution. Great Depression devastated France, not shockingly, because France, the Third French Republic, had never truly been successful. From the Boulanger affair to the Dreyfus affair to World War I, we're always waiting for a catastrophe to collapse the whole thing. And unfortunately for France, in 1938, they're about to collapse to a country called Germany. By 1938, the Great Depression drastically impacted the Western democracies. Great Britain and the United States isolated themselves as they attempted to rebuild their national economies. France was on the verge of the Civil War with no direction. They were isolated, pacifists. They didn't want war. And as all this is happening, Mussolini and Hitler began to maneuver themselves to reshape Europe as they began to reclaim their lost prestige. The Great Depression was the perfect ending of this uncertain peace. As the Locarno Agreement unfolded and really empowered empowered the Germans, we now see as everything collapses, Germany and Italy are going to assert the hegemony over Europe, and we're going to see how that plays out.